And good afternoon and happy Halloween from Philadelphia. Frank here with another episode of UFO News Network Sunday. We've got a special guest for you today, and let me bring in my co-host, Chant Hanna, to do the introductions. How are you today, Chant? Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween to you and to our special guest, Cheryl Costa, whom we've had the privilege and honor of interviewing before on our show. She's a wonderful person, and the UFO community has a great and deep respect for her. Cheryl, before I start your bio, I wanted to thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you very much, Chant. Frank.
Cheryl is a two-time service military veteran. A retired aerospace security engineer. She has had a lifelong interest in UFOs. From 1998 to 2001, she hosted the X Factor Talk radio program in Washington, D.C., covering UFOs and many other paranormal topics. From 2013 through June 2018, she wrote the wildly popular weekly newspaper blog, New York Skies, for SyracuseNewTimes.com. In 2017, Cheryl and her spouse, Linda Miller Costa, published the UFO Sightings Desk Reference, United States of America, 2001 through 2015. It is the first ever published statistical analysis of UFO sightings all over the United States. Cheryl was the 2018 Researcher of the Year Award, won that award. And by the way, I will be adding her email address at the end of the show. So if folks have any data that they want to share with her, they can do so. I wanted to talk a little bit about the UFO Sightings Desk reference, which was a book that she wrote along with her wife, Linda Miller Costa. It's a very important book, seminal book in the UFO community, both in and out of the UFO community. That book is the first of its kind, as we stated earlier, and it presents data and analysis for 100,000 plus sightings of unidentified flying objects reported by individuals during the first 15 years of the 21st century. Since 1969, the government has claimed no interest in the topic, and the press and media either ignore or ridicule any mention of UFOs. Yet citizen scientists and non-governmental organizations have continued to this day the research into this important subject. This book seeks to make the hardest data available accessible to the general public, as well as other UFO researchers. The book is organized into beginning narrative sections, including analysis of UFO sightings, frequently asked questions, and how to use this book, followed by the data. Charts, tables, and maps are presented by summary data for the entire U.S. and individual chapters for all 50 states, down to the county level, plus the District of Columbia. Aimed at the serious UFO researcher, this comprehensive volume is also of value to academic and public libraries, news organizations, and anyone who is interested in what is flying in the skies over their heads where they live. As seen in the New York Times, people are seeing UFOs everywhere, and this book proves it by Ralph Blumenthal. That was published in April 24th, 2017. I would like to welcome Cheryl Costa onto the show. Welcome. Thank you so much for having joined us on the show today.
Hi, Chant.
I had a question I wanted to start off with is, Cheryl, why did you publish the UFO Beat? And who did you go through in order to get that published? I understand that the story was a little complicated.
Okay. For 7 years, I wrote the Syracuse New Times column called New York Skies from July of 2013 till June 26th of 2019. I was always a freelancer with the paper. Okay, even though they considered me one of their columnists, I was not actually on their payroll. I got paid, but I wasn't on the payroll. And so they didn't really own the articles, as the editor and the publisher told me that I could use my articles for other things. So when I went to do the book UFO Beat, I did go back to the publisher and verified that it would be okay, and he said sure. But where we ran into snags was I had four different digital editors. It was an online edition feature, and what happened was every one of those editors saved it in a different place on the server. So I went through fits initially trying to find the articles. the articles, while I had copies, their final copy was the official copy. So I finally I worked out an algorithm that could look for it, and we launched that. We were able to identify every single article that we published.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for explaining that. I wanted to ask you a personal question. Cheryl, at times it appears as though you have a photographic memory. I say that from personal experience and friendship with you. It just appears to me as though you do have a really razor sharp memory. Can you share a little input with us on that topic?
It's twofold. Always sort of had this, I don't want to say true photographic memory. When I was in high school and I had to take a final exam or something, I used to sit down a week or two before the exam and write down any formulas or any notes that I needed. And I would write them out about a dozen times on a piece of paper, on same way every time on the paper. And when the exam came up, all that you were given was a pencil and a paper. And I would just go to the exam in a T-shirt, colored T-shirt. And when they gave me the test, I would turn it face down and I would sit there for 10 minutes and just jot down all my crib notes. And then once I got into the test, I had all this stuff available to me as sort of a cheat sheet. I had a couple of teachers try to give me crap about it, but it happened after I started the test, so nobody could say anything.
Right.
From a photographic standpoint, I'm very visually oriented. That's why I went to film school, because I think in pictures. So that's kind of where the skill is.
Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to dive right into the UFO data topic. Was there an uptick in the number of sightings this year during any of the seasons?
Yeah. Two stories to go with that. I had been on hiatus all through 2019 regarding UFO stuff. I really wasn't paying attention. I was working on other projects. And what happened was I got a phone call in late March, early April. I think the first week of April, I got a phone call from George Knapp out at KLAS out in Las Vegas, and he said his phone's been ringing off the hook for sightings. And I had a little trickle of emails saying there were uptick of sightings down in the Hudson Valley, things like that. And since New York State's my beat, so to speak, I said, wow, okay, let me look at this. And I pulled up a spreadsheet that had the last 18 years worth of the first 2 or 3 months. They had it by monthly numbers. And the numbers for the first 3 months of 2020 hadn't been this high since 2014. So it was like a 7-year high, which kind of fell into a model I had predicted that this is a 6 or 7 year cycle type of thing. And 2 or 3 years ago, when the numbers started falling off, really falling into the dirt, I predicted they'd be back about now. By golly, they were. And yes, 2020, off the rails. Things are through the roof.
That's good for our listeners to know. I'll dive into that topic a little more in a bit.
Okay.
And wanted you to please explain to our listeners the four drivers for UFO sightings.
Okay. The four basic drivers that we published in our original book were population. And most people knee-jerk in the UFO community tend to knee-jerk with population. Okay. But we discovered it was population, temperate weather, leisure time, and hours of darkness. Those were the four major drivers. The next major driver after that, sort of a fifth one, is coastline to major bodies of water. Okay. I discovered that after the book came out. I was sitting there with the census chart map that we have in the book. I was sitting there with it in my lap because I was on another talk show and we were on a commercial break. And I happened to notice, and I didn't notice this when we were putting the book together, that all the states that actually touched like the Great Lakes had very high sightings in the many thousands. Okay. Moved 2 states away and the numbers fell into the low hundreds. Okay. And then we noticed that like with a place like California has a very long coastline on the ocean, and East Coast states, like Florida and New York and things like that have these coastlines. And we loosely say coastline to a major body of water, but we say basically four major drivers.
Okay. kind of a slightly off-topic question. Do you think that the sightings um, uh, that are so high are due in part possibly to USOs, since there's a long coastline and there's an ocean there? If it's possible that there might be some kind of anomalous craft coming out of the ocean, and that's why the sightings are so high in that area. That's kind of a macro question.
Well, no, we've thought about that, and I've talked that out with a number of people. But because both of the major national databases, there's almost no. I think I've seen 3 of the many tens of thousands of references to sightings that refer to a USO, something coming out of the water, going into the water. So it might be, but all we can do is extrapolate and say, well, we noticed that places that have a major body of water, the Great Lakes, the coastlines, or something like that, there tend to be a lot more sightings. But we can't document any direct connection or correlation.
Thank you for answering that. Yeah, because we know that there's coastline everywhere in the U.S. It couldn't just possibly be related only to California, of course, since Oregon has a coastline as well. But anyway, and many other states. As odd as it sounds, is it possible that smokers are in part responsible for quite a few sightings over the years? Should we thank them for that, Cheryl? And are there more smokers outside more than ever due to the pandemic? Thoughts on that?
Well, okay, it works out like this.
That was Frank coughing extra to let the listeners know he's a smoker.
Well, we observed something that when I was writing my column, there was I'd be reading lots of these reports all the time just to see if there'd be a good story in there to read. Well, a lot of people don't know that most UFO reports are usually less than a sentence or 2 about the sighting. And they're usually not very scientific. Wow, we saw this great thing, and that's about it. But some people do put more narrative, a couple paragraphs, something like that. Sometimes you get a really nice big long write-up, but those are rare.
I see.
But many of them started out, I went outside for a smoke. I went outside to walk the dog and have a smoke. Okay. And I got talking to some MUFON investigators at one of their major MUFON investigator meetings. And they told me that frequently when they go to review a month's worth of sightings, they'll search on a text file kind of thing of the sightings, and they'll search for smoke and dog. Because figure the smokers and the dog walkers are out there day in, day out. They know the lay of the land. Okay. And they're pretty consistently out there every day. Okay. Rain or shine. So that's been kind of a fun thing because and when you get into our what we call the temperature charts, that like in a state, an upstate, like a northern state like the Dakotas or New York State or New England, the first 3 or 4 months of the year, January, February, March, April, are pretty much flat. With a very small number of numbers. And same thing says out there for October, November, December, you see these flat numbers, okay? And then they pick up a little bit in the late spring, and then July and August are through the roof. It's just peak, okay? Real steep bell curve kind of thing. And we realized that it was the smokers and the dog walkers were the consistent people out there day in, day out, and they were giving us our baseline. But it changes depending upon the latitude, and that's where the temperate weather thing came in.
That's fascinating.
Actually, Linda was the one that discovered the temperate weather thing.
Did she?
We were actually putting the book together. I had printed out all the charts and graphs, and she looked over her terminal one Saturday afternoon and said, "Did you notice there's a latitude difference with the amount of sightings in the summertime?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Up north, it's right July and August. You start going down to the middle south, they say, and it started flattening out, and all the other numbers started coming up. And then they got down to the deep south states. It was like a picket fence."
That's amazing. And I also think the UFO community owes her a great big thank you. We need to thank Linda Miller Costa for all of her hard work regarding the topics that we're going over today. There is quite a bit of contribution that she made to that book, and major contributions. And so we thank her for that.
To be honest, this a lot of people do a lot of crediting on me, and I'm an analyst and I crunch numbers. But my degrees are in the arts, television writing, film writing, entertainment writing, that kind of thing. Linda's got the real science credentials, very high science credentials, and she brought scientific discipline, which the UFOlogy community really needs.
Yes.
And she brought that to the table, and she held me to certain disciplines. We have to do it this way. We need this, and this. And she held me to a scientific analysis standard, which was a blessing.
Yes, using the scientific model is quite rare in the UFO community. So we thank her for having those stringent and high standards when she is going over the UFO topic, which we are very grateful to her for. You have been collecting data regarding a few of the topics that we've discussed for nearly 2 decades now. My understanding from your research, and I'm hoping that you'll correct me regarding the dates I'm about to give you, is from 2001 to 2018, Phoenix was the #1 city regarding sightings of UFOs. Can you please break down the rest of the data for us so we know from top to bottom the statistics on all of that between that period of time?
Okay. Phoenix, no. Let me 2018, 2017, 2018 time frame. 2000 through that whole period of time, probably the last 10 years, from about 2009 to about 2018, something like that. It was actually Las Vegas had as a city. Okay. Clark County, though, was up there significantly, and that's essentially Vegas. And then, but Nevada, the state was down to like number 25 of 50 states. So it was like halfway through. The deal was, about a year or so ago, the numbers actually came out in 2018. Phoenix as a city came up by a couple of hundred to be the top city, and Vegas fell to like number 2, that type of thing. The key thing to look at there, though, which is kind of important, the top counties. Los Angeles County is the number of 3,200 counties. Los Angeles County is the #1 county in the country with more sightings than 40 individual states.
That's incredible.
Now, in Phoenix, you got Maricopa County. Now, Maricopa County, again, they had Phoenix Lights down there many years ago, all this stuff. Phoenix, the city within Maricopa County, had always been, when our book came out, they were the #2 county in the country for sightings, with more sightings than 36 individual states, which is fantastic. But they always kind of lag behind Las Vegas, but in 2018, they came up and they were #1.
I think in August of this year, you reported that Phoenix had over 1,100 sightings, is my understanding, at that period of time.
At that point, yeah, it was. Those are rough numbers, and they're very fluid. Okay, any numbers that I've reported through 2020, the numbers have been very fluid because it's constantly changing. So I don't like to be held to one number. But on that particular reporting incident, that's the number I had.
Okay. Can you please list and expound upon the 2 reporting agencies you rely upon in order to extrapolate your UFO data sightings from?
Well, okay, there's the National UFO Reporting Center. They're based out of Washington State. And they've been around since 1974, and they went to where their web interface in the early 2000s, and we found out during the course of crunching our data for the book that they were somewhere in the 60, a ratio between them and Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. The New Fork people were typically somewhere 60 to 70% of the numbers. And then MUFON had on the order of 40 to 30% of the numbers. Now that varies, it varies from year to year, and there are several states where MUFON is the dominant. Texas is one where MUFON is the dominant reporting service. If you look at both services, both are skewed differently to a different part of the country, and if you put them both together, then you get a complete picture. And people have asked me, there's a lot of smaller UFO reporting sites around. I call them the mom and pop sites. And to be honest with you, most of them had very small numbers, or all they were doing was copying like New Forks data, that type of thing. So I just stayed with the two majors.
Okay.
Let me jump in really quick with a question for you, Cheryl. You found different correlations regarding UFOs. You were mentioning bodies of water, things like that. Now, this past week, you like the charts. You look at the charts and rises and falls. And I've seen this past week, the stock market did not go well. And when you look back over time, you can see the crash of 1929. You can see what happened earlier this year regarding the COVID outbreak. You can see the crash in late '08 regarding the subprime mortgages and all that. Have you ever been able to tie any kind of correlation between rises and falls in the UFO sighting chart to any kind of news, any kind of news in the world, September 11th, the COVID outbreak, anything along those lines? Have any of those correlations ever kind of popped up?
Amazingly not, because we typically look at only yearlies, okay, and monthlies, that type of thing. We don't normally see those kinds of fluctuations. The United States, and this is some charts we developed after the book, and we worked out some algorithms where we could take a shot of a state and look at a year's worth of sightings, or take a look at the United States and look at 1 year's worth of sightings in one chart. Okay. And it's you got a lot of little lines going across the page, and it's very wide. You have to do it on a landscape printout kind of thing. And in the United States, we average only about 30 reports a day between both databases. Okay, about 30 points. And certain times of year with warmer weather, you see that kind of ramp up, maybe 30 to 40, 30 to 50, that type of thing. But typically 25 to 30 sightings a day in the United States. And then if you look sometimes at a specific, of course, July 4th is off the page because everybody reports the goofy things they see on the 4th of July. If you look at individual states, and this is something we did last year, we identified 150 places you've never heard of that spanning across 50 states. And we've identified about 150 places that have absolutely nothing going on 90% of the time. Their state averages maybe 3 sightings a week or 2 sightings a week. But on one particular day, 2 counties, like April 16th, 2008, there was 60 sightings nationally on one day. And it was a big spike above that 20 or 30. And we dug in there, and 25 of those 60 sightings were in Indiana, a state that only averages about 1,300 a year. And they were all in 2 counties. Wow. That were adjoined to each other. Okay. And we've identified a number, like I said, about 150 of these places where we've had a one-day goofy flap of some sort. And the only way you can see it is by combining both data and looking at it with this type of algorithm that we've developed.
You may need to rehash this, but the states that are seeing the biggest upticks of sightings compared to the national trend, my understanding is California, Florida, and Texas. Is that correct?
Okay. 2001 to 2018, it was pretty much like that. California, Florida, Texas, in that order. California had like 18,800 during that 18-year period. Florida and Texas were in the high 7,000s. Okay, and Florida had a little bit more than Texas. And then the rest of the states were typically Pennsylvania, Arizona, New York, Ohio, Washington, New Jersey, that type of thing. This year, something goofy is going on. California, number 1 as usual. Florida is number 2 as usual. But number 3 is Pennsylvania. Okay, who knew? Normally Arizona is number 7. Hey, Texas is number 5. Arizona is number 6. New York's normally 5 or 6. Currently, right now, again, it's New Fork data only. And that may completely change when I mix the the MUFON data in with it. But right now, New York is coming in at number 10, but only from a NUFORC perspective. So.
I have kind of a two-part question for you. Can you then go ahead and share the upticks regarding cities and sightings rather than states and sightings for this year? And what about average daily sightings? Can you go over this regarding cities or counties?
Okay. For the current data, we're not done crunching it. I took a year off in 2019, but I can give you a number for this is NUFORC data only. At the end of the year, MUFON is going to give me 2019 data, and they're going to give me 2020 data. We have to go through some gyrations with them. Their data is stored differently than NUFORC is. In 2019, NUFORC had 5,800. This is sanitized data. I took the internationals out because if you go to their webpage and look back at the numbers, you'll see a much bigger number added up at the end of each month type of thing. And if you add them all up, you get a much bigger number. But I had to take out all the Canadian and international ones. I only track USA. So NUFORC had 5,825 in 2019. And we estimate, based on a 60-40 model, that MUFON will probably have about 3,883, basically about 3,900. We think 2019, with both databases, will be in a range of around 9,700. And this is based on a model that we have. And we're pretty close. We've come up pretty close with our model. We've learned how to do it. 2020, I'll give you a hook here. January to August, they have not put their September. NUFORC has not put their September or October numbers up yet. We expect to see that. On the other hand, Peter Davenport does run a medical supply business, and with the COVID thing, I think he's up to his butt in alligators right now. So I don't think he's going to be doing numbers. That's why they haven't updated September yet.
Yeah, we love Peter. He's great.
He's a great guy. He really is. Okay, so January through August this year with NUFORC, they had 3,053 sightings reported. Okay, this is 2019, January to August. Show you where things are different. January through August in 2020 is 4841. It's 150% of what 2019 had. Okay, and to give you a better number, in 2019, they were averaging about 300, and this is NUFORC only, okay, 394 sightings a month were being reported. In 2020, we were averaging 600 a month. So it's a rocking year, and I'm estimating that NUFORC at the end of 2020 will be probably around 12,000 sightings altogether.
Which leads me to my next question. Thank you for going over that, Cheryl. Do you believe, I have kind of
I'm sorry, I want to qualify something.
Yes, go ahead.
I said that 12,000 number. That 12,000 number was an estimate with MUFON and NUFORC data. Okay, I just wanted to qualify that, but it's going to be a big number. We're expecting 2020 for NUFORC data only to be about 7,200.
I'm glad you did qualify that, because I know since you're so into UFO data, you're a UFO data geek like I am, you would have been up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. thinking how you should have re-qualified that. But anyway, I did have a social studies question for you.
Sure.
And that is, do you believe with social unrest that is happening in various states and cities across America, that some of these alleged witness sightings of alleged UFOs or anomalous objects are due to drones surveilling the social unrest that is unfolding across America off and on throughout this year?
I have no way to confirm it. Very probably. But I'll tell you one thing I did notice. Oregon did tick up a bit in the monthlies. Okay, but I can't lock it down because I don't have September and October to average it out and see if there was an impact there. We'll know next spring by the time I get all the data in January timeframe, and I get it all someplace, get it all sanitized, and start doing that. We can look back. That's one of the things with statistics. It's one of those things that it's always a looking back kind of thing. And I've had to explain that to a lot of news directors and editors from newspapers that call me up and say, well, we need the latest numbers. Can't you just push a button? Like, isn't there an app for that? And there isn't. It takes a lot of crunching and organizing. In many cases, we've written some algorithms to do all this stuff. That thing with Oregon. Okay, first thing. Remember we said leisure time. Okay, there was a huge uptick in April because we were locked down. Okay, and a whole bunch of people wrote me on social media and said, I bet there's going to be an uptick at the end of April since we're all locked down and everybody was home, eating, watching streaming TV, and outside smoking, watching the stars. And I said, yeah, probably. And it was off the scale with Newfork. And I suspect MUFON has had an uptick as well. But until we get to analyze the data, we won't really know for sure. Now, when we do analyze the data, we might go back in, because people like you have asked the question already. We may go back in, and once we have the county data and we have the city data looking good, we might be able to look back in at a historical period and say, hey, during this number of days or this number of weeks, and in Portland, it's going to be like months, be able to look in there and see if the uptick is different than the history baseline. We'll be able to look at that, but right now we don't have a clue.
I have a question.
As far as the drones, maybe. Who knows?
I have a question that involves conjecture on your part. And that is worldwide. I think there's like 193 countries or a little under 200. And by the way, just a side note, there's actually an expert regarding countries on that topic. I'll submit the link to that article to you later, who stated that when he traveled the world, he found more countries that were never listed because there's actually unofficial countries within countries. So I found that interesting. But anyway, my question to you is, do you feel in your gut that worldwide, as first, second, and third world countries upgrade their technology regarding drones specifically, or some kind of new aircrafts, that citizenry there, actually in their own countries, are seeing these and then reporting them as UFOs?
I'm not as worried about the drone reporting, okay, because we already figured there's a certain percentage of the stuff that's baloney. Okay, we already know there's some degree of sightings that are just seriously in error. Okay, Dr. Villay says 80% is noise. MUFON says 70% is explainable. Okay.
And just to jump in from our conversation last year, you made it a point that you really don't make any kind of judgment on how good or how bad the reporting is. You just look at the raw data, and that's basically it.
We tend to look at the raw data, but where we've come from there is that we've come up with our own formula for the ones the specific shapes that we think are more exotic than anything we've got out there in the form of any kind of commercial or military aircraft. And we've come up with our numbers around 30% as well. But regarding your question, actually if you were to look at a chart of UFO sighting reports for the past, back to 1960, we'll say, most sightings were back before about the 80s were pretty much faxed into somebody. A clipping in the newspaper was sent to somebody who collected this stuff. Maybe you saw some guy in the news tracks UFOs, and people called up his answering machine and left him reports. Okay, and these things sort of got collected. And if you look at right now in my book, I had a little chart with Newfork data, and you see this little humpy thing coming from 1960 up to about 1990. Okay, actually up to about 1995. It looks like a little snake crawling across the paper in very tiny numbers, less than 500 a year. Okay, for the next book, we're coming out with a new book covering the last 20 years. And I'm going to be asking MUFON for that same window of time, 1960 to about 2000, so I can show what that overall number between both databases was, that the numbers were very small. Then in 1980s, we started having CompuServe and America Online, people started having the ability to report things, okay? And by the late 90s, people were getting off dial-up and going onto the web. And so by the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, we had a lot of reporting coming on. And basically what it amounts to is the World Wide Web, particularly in an advanced country like the United States, became the vehicle for people to be able to easily report the sightings. Now, as these third world countries start having the ability to everybody having access to some kind of technology to report these things, you're going to probably see reporting databases in those countries. Okay, and we're probably going to see or they're going to plug into National UFO Reporting Center. You wouldn't believe how many international reports come into Newfork. And I think what you're going to see is as they get more connectivity, we're going to see the numbers go up because probably the numbers have already been there. It's just they had no way to reporting. The web has been for our culture like the printing press was for previous cultures.
Right. I agree. And also with the Elon Musk's Starlink satellites in the thousands around the world, and that should also help in that effort regarding being able to report things a lot easier for third world countries, second and third world countries.
I would agree, except for the one thing is the fact that they give us false errors, because you got this little string of lights going through the sky. But that kind of thing we can filter out, because usually when you look at the write-ups, we've already had some issues with that test they did. And we were able to pick those out quite literally by looking at the description in the database and identify them as something we didn't want to count.
Understood. What type of shapes are most reported over long periods of time or short periods of time, like say this year to say compared to 2001 through 2018 or 2017? What are the most common type of shapes reported?
There's the paradox. The most common shapes that are reported are things like a light in the sky, a cylinder, a lot of things that could be easily confused with conventional aircraft. Okay. Those are the most shapes. Where the secrets are, where the real secrets are with shapes is they're in the tiny numbers. There's a shape that's called a changing shape, and I never paid any attention to it until I heard Dr. Valet on with George Knapp on Coast to Coast. And he was talking about them. Okay, about the fact you just start to put your equipment on them, then they appear to change into some other kind of shape. And I thought to myself, what the heck is that? So I went in and started looking at it and found out that they are the most consistent and the most regular UFO sighting, but there's only about 150 of them a year. And over the last 18 years, 2001 to 2018, there was only about 2,400 of them. And a lot of people in the community, I tried to point this out to people, and they just sniffed and said, oh, that's not a trend. They're looking for the big mega numbers, But actually, we found out that the secrets are in the numbers that are down there in the dirt. I'll give you an example. A year or so ago, I was talking with Louis Alessandro, and we were all talking about the fact that the numbers were falling off in 2016 to 18, 19, that type of thing. The numbers were falling off into the dirt, okay? Even Peter Davenport was saying, is somebody circumventing my numbers? Is somebody, like the government canceling reports coming into us or something? Everybody was concerned about the fact that the UFO sighting numbers had dropped dramatically. And we were talking about it over coffee, and I said, well, there are 3 shapes that are coming up. He said, what do you mean 3 shapes coming up? I said, there's 3 shapes that are actually on the increase. And when one shows up, the other 2 show up. And I printed them out a printout. And I don't know if you've ever seen Lou Alessandro. He's always got a stoic look, but he got a troubled look on his face and asked for a copy of the printout. This Saturn-shaped ship, those mile-wide guys, and that's the one like the Japan Airlines confronted in the middle 80s, 1986, I think it was, a Japan Airlines 747 cargo plane encountered one. This thing's a mile wide, and it had the agility of the plane that the guy was flying. Okay, and it seems that whenever these Saturn-shaped ships, and they're rare, but when they show up, the teardrop shape shows up, and the egg shape shows up. in frequent numbers to suggest that the teardrop might be some sort of large-scale shuttlecraft, and that the little egg-shaped ships might be just some kind of scout ship.
Right. I have a two-part question for you, and that is mainstream media asking about the topic we're covering today? Um, are they asking you about these topics that we're covering today so that they can share your data with their listeners and viewership? And the other question is, I have, do you believe that mainstream media is covering this topic more than ever? So that two-part question is mainstream media asking you about the topic we're covering today, and do you feel that they're covering it now, currently, more than ever?
Yes and no. Major papers and news outlets of record have been covering it. As we know, the New York Times has, Washington Post has, Politico has. Okay, you get down to the regional news directors, state level news directors, like here in New York State. I've approached, when my newspaper went out of business, I reached out to them and said, "Would you like to pick me up to do a similar online column every week for us?" And they laughed me off the phone. Literally. And I said, "Look, the New York Times is writing about this. Heck, they did a profile on me and Linda, you know." Right. No, we're not plugged into that. No. They can report that all the way. We're not interested in that. And right this minute, the only thing anybody's listening to is the election. So until after the election, we're not going to get very much. We're not going to give it very much play, unless something happens in a sighting. Then I get a phone call from some news director. I got a call from the MUFON investigator for Long Island about 3 weeks ago, and he said he had two news directors hammering him for numbers down there. Because they said, the newspaper said they were getting lots of phone calls. And I was able to go back and give them this number, that we've had that 400 a month versus 600 a month now increase in sightings. But they think we have this button where I can just push a button and give them the numbers right off, and give them what cities and counties right off the bat. And they have no idea how much work that takes to get this stuff. Right,
which leads me to my next question. Thank you for mentioning the length of time it takes. Wanted to thank you because we appreciate the UFO community appreciates the kind of time it takes for you to get the raw data to extrapolate the kinds of statistics that you're able to publish and share with us, because I know it can take months to do that. I don't even doubt that at times it may have taken you years due to the lack of level of technology at that period of time. And anyway, I just wanted to thank you for that. I wanted to ask you and expound upon that regarding how you actually take raw data, you polish it, refine it, and turn it into the diamonds that you share with us. How does that work?
Well, when we download the data, it has to be cleaned up. Okay, we end up with typically about 8 to 12 fields of data. And first thing, we do a quick scan to make sure information's been communicated of the descriptions. But usually after about the first cleaning, we've taken off the fields that relate to when the actual write-up about the screen. All we're really interested in is what city, date and time, what city, what state, that type of thing, and what shape. Okay. And that's really all we're interested in. We're just counting statistics. We don't have case studies. I've had people call me up. We want your 25 best case studies. We don't have them. We simply crunch numbers. Then the other problem we have to go through is, as we start going through and cleaning up things, you ask about cities. 3.5% of people don't, and this is kind of average between both databases, don't even bother to fill out the city line. You know, they don't fill it out, or they'll write something in as, "My mother told me not to tell you. My husband told me not to tell you. The sheriff told me not to tell you. Everybody in town will know I did this. I reported this." You know, that kind of paranoia. So we want to count the sighting. So we usually just put in there unspecified. And then when we correlate it back into the state, add county data, we make an unknown county for every single state in the union.
Thank you.
And sometimes the unknown counties actually have more than any of the other major counties. It's a shame that people don't take the time to give us the city, or again, in the sanitizing, they don't spell the name of their city right. Or one of the other big ones we deal with, two things, Saint and Mount. Is it MT? Is it MT period? Do you spell the word out? Is it SAINT? Is it ST period? We have to clean it up. And amazingly enough, I'm a retired IT professional. I tried to write scripts to do this, and it was easier just to go in there manually and fix it up. So,
which took an immense amount of time.
Yeah, well, back in 2016 when we did the book, things that took us months to do back then, we've developed process. Hey, we're both former government contractors, and the first rule of government contracting: do as little work as possible. So you do.
I second that emotion.
Well, what we did was we both knew how to develop good process procedures, and as we learned how to do things well, we documented and upgraded the procedure. And things that took me, say, a month to do then, with 9,000 lines worth of data from one reporting center or another, I can do maybe in 2 8-hour days now. We've really gotten very efficient at how we can do this. The most time-consuming thing is we supplement the database. In our database, we supplement it with county data. And currently, we've been doing a retrofit. We're supplementing, correcting city spellings, correcting counties, and we are adding latitude, longitude, and zip codes.
Thank you for mentioning all that. I just wanted to mention something off topic a little bit here. I had the privilege of speaking to a government official a while back. He had a master's in public administration, and he told me to the side that sometimes the government has to have meetings just to figure out when to have a meeting. That's how bureaucratic it is. So I just found that funny. But anyway, moving along, I wanted to talk about a topic regarding an article that was written recently by Alejandro Rojas, whom we just interviewed a few days ago. And he reported in an article a certain series of topics that I know you're familiar with. The title of the article is How U.S. Intelligence Community Insiders Got the Senate's Attention Regarding UFOs. In that article, Chris Mellon states, there's a quote from Chris Mellon stating that he was the individual who received, I believe it says in the parking lot of the Pentagon, the Go Fast Gimbal and FLIR videos, and that he bent the rules a bit, that he felt that it was okay for folks to bend the rules a bit, so to speak. And he was saying that in relation to that topic. And so wanted to ask you two questions. Do you feel that it was a form of disclosure regarding Chris Mellon having released those videos, or rather TTSA did, I suppose? And then also, in addition to that, do you feel that it was ethical or not ethical of Chris Mellon to have that belief regarding what he was referencing there?
It goes back to the issue of the greater truth. Now, there have been people in that deep state aspect that knew about all of this stuff for a long, long time. And it's been a secret that's been kept too long. How many guys have we had come out to us in the UFO community on their deathbeds, former CIA guys, things like this, saying this stuff is bloody real on their deathbeds? Okay. Heck, for that matter, even Jesse Marcel, who sat down with Stanton Friedman. Yeah. The reason he sat down with Stanton Friedman, he had lung cancer. He had nothing left to lose at that point. Okay. So there is a reckoning. There are people who are of conscience who say, the human culture, the human species needs to know this stuff and needs to know the truth. And from that standpoint, I say that's a very high ethic. Now, within the government deep state type of things, those FLIR videos that were released to the New York Times through Academy, I can't remember the name of the
TTSA.
TTSA, right. I sometimes call it Rockstar Academy for short. I mean no disrespect to him, but that's usually my shorthand for it. those tapes were cleared. I talked to Lou Alessandro about them. They had been cleared. The actual seriously classified aspects have been taken out. Okay. And then what do we find out here 2 years later during the middle of the lockdown? The Pentagon confirms it. And Ralph Blumenthal and I were from the New York Times and I were talking about this. He says, "Hey, they confirmed our story." You know, a reporter loves to have their story confirmed. So I think it was very ethical for them to do it. And I think, personally, I think there's something bigger pushing this. Okay. And depending upon how the election goes, we're going to have either a really crappy disclosure or we're going to have a really good disclosure.
Just to jump in with a quick question here, Cheryl, how, if such a thing doesn't exist, and it probably does in some form or another, how much would you like to get hold of a database of military UFO sightings that has been kept internally up to this point?
To be honest with you, I don't care about their data. You know why? They were more interested in mine. Okay. They have a little problem, and Lou Alessandro and I talked about this thing called posse comitatus, okay, and it's about how much the military can use civilian resources, okay, and they can't, okay, under Title 10. So their database, and actually Lou and I talked about this, really only covered military installations and where the fleet was and what was happening to the fleet. And Lou told me, he said, we would sometimes go for months with nothing. And then suddenly the boards were lighting up. Okay. So they really are only tracking their own incursions with it. And yes, it'd be fun to see what the heck they've had going on over the years. But to be honest with you, I think the bigger story is I reported between 2001 to 2018, we said that there was 146,800 sightings. Okay. We had 2 polls that were done, one by Fox Pictures in July of 2017, the other by the Gallup organization in September of 2019. And they reported the things we pretty much had seen in other polls. 36% were saying, I'm believer, 42% were on the fence, and 18% said it's baloney. Okay, we saw that. But Fox had asked the question, had you seen a UFO? And so did Gallup. And they both came back with a percentage of the country of 16%, 16 and change, but let's just say 16 for a round number. 16% of the adult population of the country says they've seen a UFO. So we extrapolated that back over, say, a 30-year period, which is what's called a generation. And we came back up with a number that for one swag just in the United States, 1 in 277 people reports what they see. Okay. You want a really rough number? 1 in 300 people. Okay. Now we ended up going to every single state and getting the census data and calculating what this is our private research we were doing. What the adult 76%. What the adult population of every single state was, and taking that 16%. Okay, so we had numbers, again, bouncing them back against actual reports, saying somewhere between 1 in 150 people and 1 in 450 people reported. But the center of the bell curve was right around 1 in 300 people reports what they see. Now crank that number, take that 146,800 number and times it by 277. We have a lot of sightings, folks, and most of them are not reported.
Yeah, we were talking earlier. Cheryl just wanted to just reiterate something that you actually discussed earlier with me. And that was Ralph Blumenthal did find it refreshing regarding his story with Leslie Keene and Helen Cooper and their Glowing Auras and Black Money article, which was published on December 16th. 2017, having been confirmed by the Pentagon. So moving along, there was just that one last question I wanted to get a little bit more information on from you before we wrap up, and that is, did you feel that it was a form of disclosure when TTSA actually released those 3 videos?
2017 itself was a disclosure year.
Mm-hmm.
In January of 2017, the CIA, through the National Archives, and they did a brilliant job, the National Archivist Librarians did a beautiful job of organizing it, released many millions of Kissinger cables from the Nixon era, that type of thing, plus a lot of other stuff, and UFO stuff was in there. And of course, for years, the CIA told us, "Oh, we don't study UFOs." And then you get in there, and in the late 40s and early 50s, they had PDFs in there that were saying, here's these two doctors talking to each other, these two PhDs talking to each other, and they were pulling their hair out about things that Linda and I analyzed. And of course, we had better data than they did. Okay, so that was a disclosure in itself. I think that also got the New York Times attention, that, hey, maybe there is something to this. So about 3 months later, two old ladies in upstate New York produced this book of data. And the New York Times looked at this, and they knew why they didn't report UFOs, because it was all anecdotal. It was always stories. Here's two ladies in upstate New York that produced a book of numbers, charts, graphs, something you could put your hands around. And that was another level of disclosure. Okay, that a major paper of record on this planet reported it. And the day after they reported it, my phone rang off the hook from news directors and editors all over the world. Okay, the next morning, the first call that came to me was Times of London. Okay, so here's where we go. When we get to December, it did not surprise me that Politico and Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal broke that story. It did not surprise me at all. I was delighted to see it. I was hoping more would come.
So does that mean that it's possible that when we have hearings on the UAP topic, that you and Linda Miller Costa might be called forward to talk at those hearings?
It's been suggested. We've got the only book of data publicly available. Even Blue Book never published the 12,000 sightings they had. And by the time they get around to doing this stuff and everybody gets settled into whatever government we're going to have after the election, my current numbers say we're going to have somewhere between 100. My database right now says 146,800. We think it's going to be somewhere between 165,000 and 170,000 sightings for the 20-year window of 2001 to 2020. And the numbers right now are looking like 168,000 based on our model.
Thank you for that information. Before we go, can you please share with us a new book that you're working on?
The new book is basically going to be the UFO Sightings Desk Reference, United States of America, 2001 to 2020. Will be, again, self-publishing, and it should be a lot of fun. It'll be probably a tad bigger, but we're going to pretty much carry the same format, but we're going to add a few additional types of charts and graphs because of the fact that we've discovered new ways of displaying the data. Something we would like to do is also in 2020, we'd like to do a 5-book series on just individual analysis of shapes. So take everything that looks like a triangle, a wedge, or a chevron, and do a book on nothing but them, and then do a book on nothing but the squares and that type of thing, and something about the circles and the circles of lights and the spheres and that, and then the exotic shapes. Okay, we figured out what shapes we'd like to do, and it would take a 5-volume set to do it. If we tried to do it in one book, it would be the size of an Oxford dictionary. It's that much data.
Understood. I wanted to go ahead and let our listeners know that if they wanted to contact Cheryl with any UFO related data, to go ahead and contact her at her email, blogger@CherylCosta.com. And I'm going to go ahead and say that again, blogger as in the word blogger, at CherylCosta.com, which is CHERYL Costa.com, COSTA. And feel free to shoot her an email or emails regarding any UFO data related topics. And then also we want to thank you for having been on our show today. It's been an honor and a pleasure and a privilege to be able to have the opportunity to interview you today, Cheryl. Thank you so much. And please tell Linda that we said hello and give her our best.
I will do that.
Yeah,
Frank
thanks so
and
much,
Shan-
Cheryl. Yep.
Frank and Shan, thank you very much for having me on. I will pass along the goodwill. And sometime in this second quarter of next year, we should have something really cool to show you.
That'd be fabulous, and we would love to cover that.
Okay, take care.
Thank you. You too.
And thanks for joining us, everybody. And we'll be back in the next week or so, and we'll have more guests, more UFO stuff. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy your Halloween, and bye-bye for now.
Bye.